The British Empire built roads, schools and hospitals across much of the world. It ultimately also abolished slavery, but the empire also committed some horrific atrocities in its conquest, just as American history is clouded by being built on the backs of the wicked slave trade, but illuminated by its defeat of the Nazis and communism. History is complicated. The past is riddled with terrible and heinous acts committed in less enlightened times. That is a fact, but it's also a fact that none of these things are your fault. They're not my fault either. We weren't there. Just as it's preposterous, in my view, to blame King Charles for the toxic masculinity of Henry VIII, which some people are doing. It's unhinged to imagine that today's generation can or should bear responsibility for their ancestors, isn't it? The self-flagellation is the vogue. There's viral currency in apologising for everything in our past to vaunt our virtue today. Well, that's what the actor Alan Cumming has done by handing back his OBE in a flurry of indignant rage. It was given to him by the late Queen in 2009. He blamed the toxicity of empire, adding he'd been grateful at the time, but now his eyes are opened. Really, Alan? They were shut, were they, for all those decades that you were alive as a supposedly intelligent man? You had no idea about the British Empire? It's not really true, is it, Alan? Just the Queen's now no longer here, so you feel emboldened to go on a little PR rampage about how disgusted you are by the whole thing. He doesn't quite realise it, Mr. Cumming, but really that's the point of this. It seemed fine at the time, but fashions and sensibilities have changed, and by today's standards it all seems terrible. But history itself, of course, stays the same. Sustained assault on the past isn't just irritating, it has direct consequences. The royal family now is repeatedly hounded by demands for apologies wherever they tour the world. The ferocious debate about reparations for the descendants of slavery in the US is toxic and divisive. It makes ordinary people who have nothing at all to do with slavery and detest the whole notion of it feel like they're under attack for something that they had nothing to do with. It reduces us to oppressors and the oppressed instead of simply people who mostly want to make the world a better place. Tearing down statues, renaming buildings, endlessly apologising for our ancestors might make some sensitive people feel better about themselves and get them a few likes on social media. But does it make the world a better place? Well, joining me now are author and playwright Bonnie Greer, OBE, and academic Professor Nigel Biggar, CBE. Professor Biggar's latest book on colonialism was cancelled by the publisher for concluding that the British Empire was not all bad. Plus the commentator and best-selling author Douglas Murray, as yet shamefully unhonoured. And we intend to correct that by the end of this programme, Douglas, so get you something out of this at the very least. All right, let's start. Bonnie, you have an honour, which you accepted. It's the Order of the British Empire. What did you think you were getting? You're going to pull an Alan Cumming? I had no idea.
I think it's the officer of the British Empire. Oh. You're commander of the British Empire.
Yes. I thought it was order.
No, officer.
So you're an officer of the British Empire?
I'm an officer and Nigel's commander.
Well, how does your role as officer of the British Empire square with your criticism of the British Empire?
Well, for one thing, I took the honour, Piers, on behalf of my late father. He was here for D-Day. He was in a segregated army. The British people were wonderful to him. He loved his country and he loved the people. And I took it on his behalf because no one gave him a medal at all. And I told the now King Charles exactly why I did it. And he said, thank you. So
I love that story.
So at my mother's funeral, I pinned the medal on her dress. So it's for my dad.
So it meant a lot to you?
It meant a lot for me because of my father's service.
So when you see Alan Cumming, and that's a great story, by the way, and it's wonderful to hear that, because all you hear at the moment is all the negative stuff from the British past. That's a nice story, it's a positive story. But when you hear Alan Cumming in this fit of rage, hurling back his honour and saying he's just woken up to the reality of the horrors of the British Empire, what is your response then?
Well, I was giggling a little bit when you did your opening oratorio because actually he would have known this, especially being a Scot, about the British Empire. I mean, that's a natural thing. You know, no empire, and I don't know what you've written, Nigel, but no empire by definition is a good thing because what it actually is about someone has to be oppressed to be in an empire.
But history, in my opinion, here's where I come at all these things.
Yeah.
History is nuanced, right?
Yes.
Current history will be nuanced.
Yes.
What we went through 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, everything is nuanced in the sense there's good and bad in all these eras.
Exactly. But then we go back to, and I'm just thinking automatically of the first strike of Indian independence, which is called the Indian Mutiny, I think they would disagree with the idea of empire. They would disagree with empire.
So was Alan Cumming wrong to hand back his honour?
He was right because he wanted to do it, but the reason he did it, I mean, if he didn't know that, I don't know. I don't know what to say.
And to those who say, well, Bonnie, you know, if you're that concerned about the British Empire, how do you feel comfortable having a title given to you by the royal family on behalf of the monarchy, which of course was a major part of the British Empire? How do you feel about keeping that honour as an officer of the British Empire if you feel that way about what the empire did?
As I said, I did it for my dad.
I understand that.
I did it for my dad. And hang on.
I get that, but what about you personally, your views of the empire
Well, I never
now?
say OBE. People call me that. They'll put it up behind my name. I never, ever say anything about the OBE. But I won't relinquish it, and it's because of my father.
OK. Nigel, you wrote a book, Professor Biggar, to give you a proper title, but you wrote a book about colonialism, a moral reckoning. It was cancelled by Bloomsbury. We live in this absurd world now where publishers are censoring authors after they commission books and tell them, what are you going to write about? And they say this, and they say great. And then you write about it, and then they cancel you.
Yep.
Which, apart from anything else, is ridiculous. So I just think publishers are making themselves look absurd. But what was the pretext of your book? And what is the overview that you drew in conclusion about the British Empire?
The British Empire, I mean, you mentioned slavery, and that's true. For 150 years, the British were involved in slaving other people, Africans, like everyone else in the world. I mean, even I was in North Carolina earlier this month and went to the Museum of History of North Carolina, which told me that in 1860, on the eve of the American Civil War,
the Clotilda. Yeah.
30,000 emancipated slaves, some of whom kept slaves themselves, which is so common. But in the early 1800s, Britain was among the first states in the history of the world, to abolish the slave trade, and the leader in suppressing the slave trade all over the world, from Brazil to Malaysia.
Nigel, may I just ask you a question? I'm sorry to interrupt you. And I would ask you this because you know more about this than me. What I understand is that the abolition of the slave trade was partly a reason, a way for the Royal Navy to have supremacy on the seas. In fact, the Royal Navy boarded slave ships, and this was more about the Royal Navy than it was about abolition of slave trade.
You're kind of saying that the Royal Navy wanted to exert itself, and so freeing slaves was one way to do it. That's kind of back to front. I mean, the Royal Navy spent in the 1830s spent about 13% of the total manpower just manning ships on the coast of West Africa to stop slavers, and 17,000 sailors died of disease. It was enormous.
Nigel, out of interest, why was your book cancelled by your publisher? Why didn't they publish it?
A reliable source tells me that woke junior employees in Bloomsbury Publishing protested against publishing anything they didn't agree with. And for some reason, I don't understand, the grown-ups in senior management caved in.